Hello, you. Here you go. Here's looking at you, kid. Mm-mm-mm. Mm. I want you to get yourself a cup of coffee or a glass of water, whatever you need, because I don't know how long this video is going to be. It might be real long, and it might not, you know? I want to share with you today. This is Velma Hagar. And you know, I want to tell you my life story. And I don't even know where to begin. You know, I always shoot from the hip. I don't have a plan. I don't have it written down somewhere. I don't have ticker tapes, whatever you call it, in front of me. I just want to tell you my story. And I want to tell you as best I can and as systematically as I can without having to have it be written down. So with that said, I'm going to start out. My mom and dad were married in like 1939, I think. And my mother was Italian and my dad was Irish. My mother had a great dream of being an artist one day, and she used to carry around this little box of pictures that she had drawn. She carried them for years, and when we were kids, we used to love to go through and see the things she had drawn. And then my dad, on the other hand, was a professional boxer, and he had a dream of being somebody great, and he almost was. He was the Golden Gloves champion of California, which was pretty small, but that was something. And then later he became a contender for the bantamweight championship of the world. But in so doing, back in those days, they didn't have the things to protect the boxers like they do today. And he ended up going into a fight and that he wasn't qualified to fight because he was too small and the contender was bigger. And the guy literally beat his brains out. But my dad kept getting up again. And consequently, my dad holds the record for being knocked down the most times in a professional boxing match and getting up again. And he will always hold that record because they don't let him get knocked down that many times now. They stop the fight. And so on one hand, my dad left us an amazing legacy. But on the other hand, he got his brains knocked loose that day. And we all suffered on that account. So fast forward a little bit, they have a baby in 1941. They have their first child, and that's my sister Bobby. And she's born in San Bernardino, California. Well, after that, my dad was always struggling financially. We were always dirt poor because he was a professional boxer and he really didn't have much talent other than that. And so they used to pick fruit and vegetables, and we would go to Palm Springs and San Francisco or Salinas in the summer, because Palm Springs you couldn't live in the summer. It was so hot in those days. But when we did come to Palm Springs, we would stay on the Indian reservation. We lived on the Indian reservation with the Indians, even though we were just white squatters. If you had an income low enough, you were allowed to live out there. So my dad he was pretty good at golf, and so he became Bob Hope's personal caddy over at O'Donnell Golf Course in the winters. And he would go over to O'Donnell Golf Course and caddy for Bob Hope or whomever. And that was his job when he was not boxing, which he didn't box much after we were born, a little bit, I think. So my oldest brother, Bro, was born here in Palm Springs. In those days, the military, my dad was in the Army when he was born, and there was an Army hospital here in Palm Springs because George Patton was here. And so Bro was born in that hospital. And today it's still a hospital, the same hospital in Palm Springs. But I was the second born, and I was born in San Francisco in the times that we were in that area. And then Sammy, who was the youngest one, was born in Salinas because they were picking carrots or lettuce or something there. And all through this time, we were so poor, you guys. I mean, I'm going to call this either from rags to riches or from the outhouse to the penthouse, because when we lived on the Indian reservation, I want to just iterate about that a little bit. We had a house with a dirt floor, and all that there was my grandmother, my dad's mother, my paternal grandma and grandpa lived there. She got a piece of linoleum and laid it on top of the sand, and that was the floor. And it had no toilet and no running water. There was one spigot about 2 blocks away, and we used to have to take a bucket down there to get water and bring it back. And there were outhouses throughout the reservation that you could use. I mean, literally just those old, small little shacks, you know, that was our toilet. And we took baths outside. You wonder how we bathed and how we, you know, we used to get Mother had a big wash tub, and she'd put it on a fire outside. They'd build a fire out there and get it warm. And we used to take a bath outside in that tub. I don't know where the heck the adults bathed. Don't ask me, I don't know. All I know is we took a bath in that tub, and probably once a week. And then they'd wash the clothes the same way in that tub with a wash tub, and they would use little bits of lye soap, and Grandma, I can still see Grandma doing this to the water to run that lye soap through there, and then they would rinse it out and bring them out by hand. And I mean, we lived like squatters that we were. We were squatters, literally. I can remember that house when the wind blew in the desert. And this was in Palm Springs. And when the wind blew, because there was nothing here then, it was all sand, just sand. But Palm Springs itself had what we call it was like the Hollywood bunch. I can't even think of it right now. But it had a little area that they used to live in, and it was beautiful in there. Little Tuscany. There was part of it was Little Tuscany. The something colony, the Hollywood colony or something like that. And everybody that lived here that wasn't a celebrity worked for the celebrities. That's what it was. And then all around us was nothing but sand. Well, Mom and Dad, of course, worked for the celebrities. My mother would clean houses, and Dad would caddy out at the golf course, and we lived out there on that reservation with those Indians. And so when the wind blew, I kid you not, the sand was so thick. We used to have to put a bandana around our face because you'd breathe in the sand, and it would come in that little shack that we lived in, and everything in there would be destroyed. Like there'd be sand in the bread, and you know, it was just awful. And I remember being inside that little shack one time, and the doggone thing blew over. Now, when it blew over, it just literally went sideways like this, and the house was standing up like this, sideways, and the bottom had no floor, remember? So it was just like you could walk back out of it. You can now walk on the side of the building, you know. And then the brothers, my dad's brothers, they just came and they just lifted it back up. I mean, that was what we lived in. It was literally a lean-to. And everything was done outdoors. You know, we did everything outside because Palm Springs weather in the winter allowed it. And I can remember my dad shaving on a tree, looking at a little broken glass at a tree, shaving, you know, and you know, washed, like I told you, we washed outside. We did everything outdoors. So somehow or other, and then we'd go back and forth like that. And I can remember my dad all throughout this time was a psychotic drunk. And when he would drink, he would get so mean. And I can tell you this, fear was what I remember as a child. Now, I'm going to drink my coffee in between because it's like you're here visiting with me, okay? And we're talking. So, he would hit my mother, get drunk, cuss her. Oh my God, he cussed her. And she was full-blooded Italian. And you know, he hated the Italians. He used to constantly call her Mussolini and, you know, Fatty Arbuckle and just all kinds of things he would say to her, you know. And so my mother was very docile in those days. She didn't fight him back because I think she knew she couldn't. If she would have, I hate to think what would have happened. My mother was like a little mother hen with us kids. You know, she had the 4 of us, and here she's got this psychotic drunk, and I don't remember him working when we were a child. I don't remember hardly ever my dad working. I don't, you know, other than picking fruit and stuff like that. He never really had a job. And it was just horrifying. The places we lived were dumps, and her mother's trying to take care of 4 kids, and him getting drunk, and we would run out of the house, and he would chase her, and it was awful. It was just a nightmare life. And I want to just tell you this one story because, you know, there's so many stories, and I don't quite know which ones to share. But I want to share this one with you because this whole thing in the end is going to end up being a testimony of what God can do in your life. So we were living in Salinas, and my dad used to come home drunk, of course, as he did everywhere. And we had this little tiny house. It was 2 rooms. It had a kitchen and it had a bedroom. And then it had, in the kitchen was a little cot that my sister and I slept on. And Sammy was a baby in in a crib. I don't know where Bro slept, to tell you the truth. I can't remember. I was too young. Mom and Dad in a bed in it was the living room and the kitchen. That was it. So we had a little ice box in the kitchen. And, you know, it wasn't a refrigerator. It was literally an ice box. And the iceman used to come and deliver ice. And when he'd do that, my dad used to get an ice pick, and he would pick the ice, and we used to get the chips. You know, it was always a fun day when he came. And I remember being outside one time, and I saw the Iceman come, and then I heard this chipping going on, and I thought it was my dad with the ice pick. So I had a friend with me, and I said, oh, come in, my dad's chipping the ice, we can get some ice. We get in there, and of course my dad is breaking everything in the house. He's just busting everything on the floor, you know, and the horror that a child feels. I want to tell you, parents, if you have one of the in your family, the mother or the wife or the husband, doing this in front of your children, get your children out of there. Please, I implore you, do not allow your children to grow up with that. I grew up with so much fear in me that I had post-traumatic stress syndrome when I left my home, when I got older. But see, I might cry, I might laugh, I might cry, I don't know what I might do, because these memories are really horrible. So my mother would go out when my dad would get like this, and she'd take us with her, and we would hide somewhere. And this particular day, we were hiding in a garage that was attached to these little lean-to places we lived in. And Mother had reached her hand out and locked the door from the outside so he wouldn't think we were in there. And we were hiding, and you know, she's got us real quiet, back in the corner. I just remember a lot of clothes and stuff being back there, probably things she'd made a pallet to keep us warm. I don't know. We were in Salinas. And all of a sudden, he came through that door. And I don't know how old I was, maybe 3, something like that. All I know is it was like the boogeyman found us, and I started screaming. And I screamed, and I screamed. I mean, they couldn't shut me up. I can remember this. They actually got scared because I kind of like went into some kind of just screaming, so scared. Pure fear entered me that day. And from that day on, I lived with that fear, and I lived in constant fear that my dad was going to kill my mother. I was always afraid that my dad was going to kill my mother. So I would go to school, and I'd have this fear that I would come home, my mother would be dead. I just lived with that fear every moment of my life that my dad was going to kill my mother. And he tried. Believe me, he did. He tried. Look at me crying. I mean, you know, I probably will weep a little. You're just going to have to deal with it, okay? Okay, so now I'm going to skip around here. So now somehow or other, we ended up in Fontana. My dad had a sister, and her name was Aunt Willie, and she was a wonderful sister. I loved her. She was harsh, but she was a good woman, and she tried to help my dad. She was her brother, her baby brother, and she tried to help him. So she brings him down to Fontana and gets him a job at Kaiser Steel. Now, I was 8 years old when this happened, so I'm going to pick up from here how we ended up in Fontana. And my dad goes to work at Kaiser Steel. And we ended up living in Fontana from the time I was 8 until the time I got married. My mother left my dad when I was 15, okay? We still lived there, but I graduated from Fontana High and stayed there that whole time. Not in the same house. We moved, oh my God, you know, talk about no roots anywhere. We never lived in a place even a year. We never lived in a house even for 1 year. We just were constantly moving around, and my dad was drinking, and my mother was trying to make it work, and oh my God, it was just a nightmare, And we were raised Catholic. My mother was a little Catholic, and she found the Lord, let me tell you. Thank God, because it was what kept her going. And she used to go to the little church. I love this part of the story. And she used to tell us, you wait out here, and she'd go in, and she'd put her little kerchief on. In those days, Catholics had to have a hat on to go inside. A woman did, had to have her head covered. And then she'd come out, and she'd go in there and just kneel down. The church would be closed, not when the church wasn't going on. It was just the empty church. And she'd go in there, and she'd pray. She'd come out, and she'd say, okay, everything's going to be all right now. It's going to be all right. And we were like, oh, good, it's going to be all right. She instilled this faith in us. She'd say, God's going to take care of us. He'll take care of us. Don't worry. So all these years now, here we are, and I'm still scared to death. My dad's going to kill my mother. We go from house to house and home to home, and everywhere we live, it's the same thing. And we have to go out at night when he gets drunk. He comes in, he's plastered, he's cussing, he's swinging his fists at my mother, and she has to run and hide. And she tells us certain things like, meet me outside underneath this tree. And we moved into this one place where we had orange groves, and we would go and we'd get under these orange trees that would come down real low to the ground, and we'd get under there, and she'd make a little pallet. She always had things hidden outside so that we could have warmth and stuff if we did have to go out. She was very prepared, and she tried really hard. So we would go out and hide under those trees, and then if you had to cough or something, and my sister constantly had to cough, and you have to be real quiet because now this monster, who's my dad, we can hear him walking, looking for us, right? And to me, this was like the boogeyman right at our door. It was my own dad. I was so afraid of him, so afraid. It was rightly so. My mother would never let him hit us, however. I have to tell you this. As much as she was docile, I can remember one time him doing something to me. And I'm just going to tell you what it was. I was in the bedroom, and I was about 10 years old. And he was drunk, and he was poking at me here, and he's going, oh, you're getting some titties. And my mother walked in there. Oh, Guido, stop it. And she grabbed me by the hand. And to me, I'm thinking, well, it wasn't that big of a deal. He was being nice to me. He's never nice to me, right? And she looks at him and she said, if you ever touch one of my girls, I will kill you. And I'm like, oh my God. And then she pulled me out of there. And I'm like, what did he do? That wasn't any big deal. It was, because I was a young girl, I didn't realize, that this was so wrong. But my mother was so protective. We never got physically abused. We never got sexually abused. And the environment we lived in, believe me, it could have happened real easy. And so now we would go out at night. From there, I can remember him. He would get her in the bedroom, you guys, and he'd rape her. And we would be there, in this little place. And it was awful. I remember putting my fingers in my ears like this. I used to have my fingers in my ears all the time to stop the noise, and I hated it. And so this one time he had her in this bedroom, and she was begging him, please let her go, let her go, let her go. And finally she went quiet. Well, as it turns out, and then Bobby and I, my sister was just like a little, I don't know, she was tougher than me. I was always the weak one. I was afraid. She was kind of like him. Anyway, we're yelling at the door, you better let my mommy loose, you better let her loose. And so finally, somehow we get outside, and then in the next scene, she tells us he was choking her, and she said everything went black. It just went completely black. I don't know why he released me, but he did. He let her go. And of course, all these things, my worst fears, coming upon me. And then she would take us out and she would say, now, if anything ever happens to me. Now, she had to say that because she had to prepare us. But when she would say that, she confirmed this fear in me that went on and on and on. And she'd say, I have this little bit of money that I've got hidden here. She'd have it down in some hole or something. And get this money and try to find your grandparents, which are her mom and dad. But everybody was afraid of my dad. Everybody was afraid of him because he'd beat everybody up, So even her parents were afraid, and they would help us only if he wasn't around, but they wouldn't help us if he was there. They'd run like chickens because he'd beat them up. Everybody was afraid of him. So, okay, so I'm going to skip ahead now to when we get into Fontana. And now we're sleeping outdoors, and my mother has chickens, always has chickens everywhere we go, and she would clean out these chicken coops. And in preparation for having to sleep in there. Now, in these chicken coops, it was a little house, and the chickens were up on a little roost up here. She made the bed down here, and it was only big enough for us to all lay under the chickens where they're roosting and pooping. We're under them all night. The places we slept, you guys, hiding from him, you cannot imagine. There was a time, and this one was horrifying. We dug a tunnel, as children will do, and we would put a roof on it with boards, and then we'd put dirt on top of it, and then we'd go in through one end, you know, and we'd have like a little tunnel down in there. We slept in that sucker with Mom and all 4 kids down in that tunnel. And here comes my dad looking for us, walking on the top and the dirt falling. And oh my God, it was like we were sleeping in a grave. So anyway, there was all kinds of stuff like that, just horrifying. And always, always dirt poor, no money, right? Bobby and I went to work at a very young age to earn any money to do anything at all. And when I was 15, I got a car that I paid $50 for. I'd gone to work in this little hamburger joint, and I got enough together to buy this little car, and so now I got a car. And that was something else. I skipped over a time when my mother got her first car, and then we were able to sleep in that. When I was about 10 years old, my grandparents bought my mother a little car, like a $50 car also. And it didn't have a window on one side, but all 5 of us, my mother would make a bed in that car, her and all 4 of us kids. And we would sleep in that car with no window on one side. She'd put a board in it at night when we slept. And I mean, we were just vagabonds. We'd go to the dump and rummage. That would be our outing. And my mother would we didn't have any money. Crawdads, she would go to these crawdad holes, and we would get crawdads, and she'd boil them up and get potatoes out of the fields, and she'd fry the potatoes. And I mean, we just ate like paupers. And we used to get mustard greens. The mustard greens in California would grow. She'd show us right the ones that were good for eating, and we'd snip them off. And, you know, my little Italian mother, she'd make it taste good, you know, and we'd eat by the side of the road. And so, okay, so now let's just skip ahead. And when I'm 15, my mother finally leaves my dad for good. And after she left him, I'm really condensing this story. But, you know, what else can I do? I've already talked 20 minutes. So after she left him, we hid from him. He never found us, because if he would have found us, the times we tried to leave him before, he'd find us, and you guys, he would beg and beg, please come back. I promise I'll never do that again. I promise I won't drink. I promise. And we would even say, oh, he means it this time, Mama. He means it. Well, we'd go back and it started all over again. So this time we hid. We were still in Fontana. And we moved 3 blocks up from him. And he never went up that way on where we lived. He always went this way, because up that way there was nothing but the mountains. So we had this converted chicken coop. It'd been converted into an apartment. My mother rented it. She paid something like $10 a month for it. And we lived up there. And Bobby and I both worked and helped Mother. We paid to live in the house. And my mother took in ironings. And then she got this job at this hosiery place, and she only made $1.25 an hour. But back in those days, you know, it still wasn't much, but it was more than it is today. And then with Bobby and I both working, and the boys were younger, and they were still in school, and we went to school too, but I was a junior and Bobby was a senior. So we graduated from high school in Fontana. My dad never found us, and my dad lost everything, ends up on the streets. He ends up a street person. So when I'm 15, my dad becomes a street person. And so, but Mom is plugging along and doing the best she can, and she's a hard worker. That woman worked at one place for 30 years. She never called in sick one day. And she actually went up the ladder. She went to night school, learned how to type, because she didn't even know how to do anything except clean houses. She learned how to type, and she became a clerk typist, and she got, you know, she started getting health insurance, and as time goes on, she does really good. In the meantime, I'm a senior. I graduate, and a year after I graduate, and I'm still in horrible fear for my mother, just all the time. And I had anxiety. Oh my God, I had anxiety so bad. And when I'm 18, I meet Bob Solis, and I marry him. I fall madly in love with Bob. The moment I see him, I'm just crazy in love with him. But it was because he was so handsome, and he was just as handsome as they come. And we weren't really good for each other when I look back, but we sure made nice children. And I love Bob as a friend. He's a wonderful friend to me today. But we weren't well suited. You know what I mean? We just weren't well suited. I always used to say he didn't like me. He loved me, but he didn't like me. Well, anyway, I won't go into it. I'm not going to go into that because there's too many other things. And Bob's a good person, and he's got a good wife today, you know. So, but anyway, so I marry him, but I have this anxiety so bad. And I end up having the children, and I mean, nobody knows what I'm dealing with, this fear in me. Oh, it just stayed, that fear that entered that day. And I just get more and more afraid of everything that moves. I'm just scared to death. And Bob was a decent man. He was a police officer, and he ended up getting transferred down here to the desert. So I leave Fontana then and come down here when I'm 22. And I've been here ever since. I'm 78 now. But that was how I got to the desert, was Bob Solis signs up as a deputy sheriff, and they transferred him down to the desert. And he ends up leaving me when I'm 35, and he runs off with another woman. And I've got these 3 kids, and oh my God, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I mean, I haven't got the slightest idea. He didn't help me at all financially. I love him to pieces today, but sorry, he didn't help me. And nobody offers to help me. You know, I'm like, here I am, I've got these 3 kids. I don't know what I'm gonna do. But anyway, before he left, I had got this, he had gotten a little retirement from the sheriff's department because he got medically retired when he was 38. He fell from he was out on a hunt for some kids up in the mountains in Palm Springs, and he fell 15 feet and he broke his kneecap. He burst his kneecap. So because of that, he got medically retired and he got some money. And he helped me get this little dress shop, half of a dress shop at the time. And it was only making I was drawing $250 a month from that dress shop when he left. He probably didn't realize that I wasn't making any money. I don't know what I thought, but he runs off with this other woman and leaves me and the kids. And I'm telling you guys, you just can't even imagine. You talk about fear. Now I've really gone into anxiety, panic attacks at night, rushing me to the hospital because I think I'm having a heart attack. You guys that have been through anxiety know the way it goes, and it was awful. So remember now, going back now to the faith that my mother had instilled in us, but up until this point, it had never really taken hold in me. And in fear, after he left, I remember I got down on my knees, and I think you've heard me tell the help me prayer. I got down and screamed, "Help me!" And I knew who I was asking. I did know there was a God there. I did. I didn't know him personally. I just thought he was dead on the cross, but I did believe in him. I was a believer. I just didn't know him. But I knew enough to do that. That was the first thing I did right there. So now, gosh, there's so much to tell you, but I'm going to try to skip ahead as much as I can. So it wasn't where I started serving God there. I just asked God for help, and he came in, and little by little, I began to find my way, and I was so good at pushing money around and making money work and that I found a way to make it. I just made it somehow. My kids say to me today, "How did you do it, Mom?" I go, "I don't know how I did it. It was God that did it. I don't know. I can't even tell you. All I know is I did it. I did it one day at a time." So one of the things I'm going to tell you is, and remember now, I didn't know the Lord, and so I did things I wouldn't do today, but I met this married man, and he was a multimillionaire, and he took me to Vegas. And I ended up winning a lot of money on the crap table, like it was $8,000. To me, that was like $1 million today. And I came home with that money, and I'll never forget, I brought it into my kids, and I flared it out. And, they were so excited. "What are we going to do? We're going to do this." You know what we're going to do? We're going to invest this money. And in 5 years, I'm going to turn this into $50,000. I always had a good head on my shoulders. I want to tell you, God gave me a real good business head. And a head to use money, how to use money, So that was my little start. And then Bob and I had lived in a very small little, not small, it was 3-bedroom, 2-bath, but it was only like maybe 1,500 square feet house that we had bought when we were married. And in the divorce, I got the house until I got married again, or until I sold it, and it was half his, whatever I got out of it. When he left, we had $25,000 worth of equity in it. And so I ended up refinancing that house, and I used that money, plus the other money I'd won in Vegas, to buy this little shoe store, to start out with this little shoe store. It was only 660 square feet. And then after that, I have to tell you, I lived in that house for 30 years. I refinanced it 8 times. Remember, I get no child support. I got 3 kids. But I refinance this house 8 times. I get $15,000 out of it each time I do it, right? And I use this little Jacob spirit, my kids call it, because I was always good with money. I could always figure out how to make money, stretch, how to, you know. And I began to work that little shoe store. Let me tell you, I worked that little shoe store. And I stayed in that same place for 13 years and ended up moving down the street. But in the meantime, one of my girlfriends, who I happened to go to high school with in Fontana, I went to grade school and high school with in Fontana. Her and I used to boogie around, we used to call it, before we knew the Lord, right? She moved away to Montana. And when she comes back, she knows the Lord. And I'm like, oh God, she's a Jesus freak. Oh, yuck, you know. But to make a long story short, she asked me if, she comes into the house and she says, look, she starts crying, real tears. And the way you cry with me, you're going to always catch my attention. She says, you know, Velma, you and I have been together all our lives. And I want you in heaven with me. And I know you believe in God because we went to St. Joseph's Church together. And I know you believe, but you have to pray this prayer with me to make sure you're in heaven. And I'm crying, okay, I'll pray the prayer. Well, as it turns out, it was what we call today the sinner's prayer. She leads me to Jesus. Do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God and that he died on the cross for your sins? And, you know, yeah, I do. Now remember, I'm still riddled with anxiety, which I hide all the time, by the way. I'm hiding it from people. I try not to let people know. I'm real ashamed of it. So that day, I pray the sinner's prayer. Nothing really happens. Nothing really changes, except she leaves a Bible with me, and I start reading the Bible. I'm going to tell you guys, the rest of this story is a miracle. It's a miracle, the way everything fell into place. I pray the sinner's prayer. You know, today you know me as a radical. You know me as someone who is, I'm so into the Lord. I mean, I pray at the drop of a pin. I trust God with all my heart. When she leaves, after she leaves me here with that Bible, I made a decision that I was going to read the Bible. And because it was so slow in the shoe store in the summertime, I decided, I get saved in October, right? And so I go through the next season of work, and then come June, it's so slow. I decided I'm going to read that Bible from stem to stern. And I did it. I started out, and I read, and I'm going to tell you, I was never the same again after that. I was never the same. You know, the Bible was given to us as a book of instructions, and it says that 90% of the people never read it completely through. Imagine, 90% of people don't read it. And maybe they open it up once in a while and read it, you know, as proverb or, you know. And I read it all the way through. There were some parts honestly, I didn't quite get, I didn't understand. You know, you have to read that Bible over and over and over and over and over and over to get it. You never quite get all of it all the days of your life, I'll tell you that. But my journey began with God. My miraculous journey began with God. One of the first things I did was I called unto him. There's a scripture that says, call unto me and I will deliver you from all of your fears. Well, let me tell you, this girl, I was afraid of everything that moved. I was so many fears. You know, they say that there are 2,000 fears known to mankind. 2,000. And only 2 of them we're born with. The fear of falling and the fear of loud noises we're born with. The other ones are all learned behavior, and I'd learned every one of them. I'm telling you, I was afraid of everything that moved. And you know what? God, little by little by little, began to remove those fears one at a time. They didn't come all at once. It was like it was a journey. This was a journey. And then all my years, I used to have this thing in my heart that I wanted to live at Ironwood Country Club. I thought one day I want to live at Ironwood Country Club. That was a place up the mountain, or up the hill from where I lived. Only 4 miles from where I lived. It was right up to the foot of the hill, the foot of the Santa Rosa Mountains in the desert. But I didn't have any idea how I'd ever get here, you know. And one day, and now remember, I have this little shoe store that begins to prosper. I'm working all alone. I'm working my little butt off. I get up, I dress up, and I show up. I always love that line. Get up, dress up, and show up. And I did it. Some days I'd sit in that shoe store all day. Not one person would walk in. Not one person. It would be, I didn't know how I was going to pay the rent there or the rent at home or feed my kids. But I got up, dressed up, and showed up. And then I began to acknowledge God. And I learned very young to tithe. And I'm not going to go into tithe now, but I learned to give money to the church. I don't care what you think about it, because let me tell you, this is kindergarten stuff if you really want to get God's blessing. So I started giving my little mere pittance that I had. I didn't have much, but I made sure I gave my little 10% of what I had to the church. I found this little church that I began to go to, and I'm telling you, my life, slowly but surely, I'll never forget, one day I was driving down El Paseo. I was riding in my new Mercedes, and I had this big diamond on my finger, and I'm driving up to Ironwood Country Club, where now I live. And I'm saying, how in the world did I do it? How in the world did I make it? I mean, I literally made it. I had everything I ever dreamed of. I mean, I was like, oh my God, I did it. I mean, I'm telling you, this is like, this story to me, my proof that God is real. He took this little scared wimp, afraid of everything, and he prospered me. He literally prospered me. And it wasn't overnight. Let me tell you, it was a long journey. I'm cutting this kind of short. But I told you how I read that Bible from beginning to end. That was the first of 13 times in a row I went from beginning to end. And then pretty soon I started really studying it from beginning to end. I pulled all those treasures out of there. I pulled those hidden treasures in secret places. You know, my little book. Get my book if you don't have it. And you know what? Hit that subscribe button too, even though this is really long. But you know what? I just had to do it. And so today, this girl, now, not only do I live at Ironwood Country Club, I'm not bragging, but I want to tell you, I have the desires of my heart. I'm completely debt-free. I don't owe anybody anything. I've got tons of money in the bank. All I need to live on for the rest of my life, and to live well, and to be sure to leave some for my kids. I got plenty for them. I do anything I want to do. Anything I want to do. And you know what? I'm going to tell you something. God gets all the glory. Most women, you know, one time my brother Sam said something to me that I loved. He goes, Velma, you're such a success story. And I go, me? What about you? And he goes, no, you know what? Most people that would have been in your place with 3 kids and no child support and no job would have gone on welfare. They would have just gone on welfare. And you know what? He's right. He's right. And if anybody ever deserved it, I did. I didn't know from one day to the next how I was going to pay those bills, how I was going to even feed my kids. But you know what? I learned to trust God. And that scripture that says, those that put their trust in God will never be disappointed. Never be disappointed. I could spend the rest of my life trying to tell you how grateful I am for what God did in my life. And listen to this. I'm not afraid of anything. Nothing. Nothing. All of those fears gone. What you look at today, you look at a very brave woman. Is that good? He delivered me from all of those fears, just like he promised. I don't like earthquakes, so I have to tell you, I did not like earthquakes. That's the only thing. I'm not afraid of them. And when they happen, I just go, Jesus, 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 as I rock. I don't like that. But no fear. I don't have any fear. I'm going to tell you that in itself, that God could take this little scaredy cat and turn me into this bold, brave prayer warrior. You know, I trust God with all my heart. And I told this whole story, and I missed so many details. There's so much more to my story. But I wanted you to know what God can do with a life that is that's in the pits. I mean, honestly, we were so poor, you guys. I mean, to think He brought me without any help from a husband. Now I mean, you guys know this story. When I was 59, I married Phil Otterman. I don't know, you don't, that's another whole story. Because all those years, I did it all by myself. I was 38 when he left, or 35 when he left, and I married Phil Otterman at 59, so all those years in between. But when I married Phil, of course, I had the 12 of the most beautiful years in the whole, they were the best years of my life. There's no doubt about it. He lived for 12 years, and he died 6 years ago. But you know, so there, by then, you know, everything started just falling into place. God truly brought me the desire of my heart, even the kind of marriage I always longed for, and the kind of husband, and my kids are called, they've risen up and called me blessed. They're all three successful. They're beautiful kids. I tell you, God has turned this life. I literally went from the outhouse to the penthouse, really, and I give God all the glory. And if your life isn't the way you want it to be, doggone it, do what I did. Start asking God for help. Get the Bible, start reading it. Your journey can be just as good as mine or better. You know, I'm 78. I'm going to be out of here before I know it. I'm going to be home in heaven with my Lord. Don't you dare cry when I die either. Celebrate when I die, because I'll be celebrating. All right, look at me. I talked for 41 minutes. Holy moly. I bet you guys didn't last to the end anyway. I probably don't have any of you left. If I do, right at the bottom, I stayed to the end. Would you? Okay, you guys. I did it. I pulled it off. Subscribe to my YouTube. I usually only do 5 or 10 minutes. And get my book, Hidden Treasures in Secret Places. It's dedicated to my mother, who showed me how to find those hidden treasures. And many of them are actually the inside of a chicken coop, all cleaned up. Okay, you guys, until next time. This is Velma Hagar, bidding you a blessed day and reminding you, go from the outhouse to the penthouse, but you're going to have to get God to take you. Bye.